Class 10th, welcome back to your social studies classes. In today's class, we are going to start chapter number 3 of Civics, and the chapter name is the Union Executive, the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. So let's start today's Civics class. Prime Minister of India has got very strong and prominent position in India because the makers of the constitution has provided or has rejected the presidential system and adopted the British model of parliamentary or the cabinet form of government. So cabinet form of government means there shall be a council of ministers and which is headed by a prime minister, which is headed by the prime minister at the head to aid and advise the president, right? So ours is what? Ours is parliamentary or cabinet form of government. So as I already told you in the previous chapter, the president has or president is a nominal head of a state, but the real executive head is the prime minister. So prime minister is the real executive head of the state. And the president, it's written here also, the president is the nominal or the constitutional head of the government or the state, and the active head is the prime minister. So real executive head is the prime minister, and this is known as a cabinet form of government. Now next is appointment of prime minister. How the prime minister is appointed, how the prime minister and his council of ministers are appointed. Now the prime minister is appointed by the president and the other ministers are appointed by the president on the advice of the prime minister, right? Prime minister is appointed by the president and other council of ministers are appointed by the president with the consultation of, with the advice of the prime minister. In reality, this is only a formal power of the president. The prime minister is the leader of the party or the coalition which commands a majority in the Lok Sabha. So prime minister is a leader of that majority party or the coalition party. So coalition means it's a leader which is the government which is formed by 2 or 3 groups, right? And the leader among that coalition groups or coalition party can be the leader of that group. So the coalition, the prime minister is the leader of the majority party or the coalition party which commands that majority in Lok Sabha. In appointing the prime minister, the president has very little power of making a personal choice. So in appointing the prime minister, the president has very little power. So very little power means he has, as I already told you, he is the nominal head only. He is the constitution head only, right? So he has got a very less power of making a personal choice, president's personal choice. Now next is position, powers and the functions of prime minister. So in powers, position and the functions of prime minister, we'll talk about the relationship of prime minister with the president and the link between the prime minister and his council of ministers, as well as the function of prime minister in the parliament and his function, his role in the world conferences, as well as the prime minister as a leader of nation. So these topics or these headings under this the powers and the functions of prime minister we are going to discuss. So the first one is the prime minister and the president, the link between the prime minister and the president. Now the prime minister is the link between the cabinet and the president. Okay, there are 3 kinds of or 3 categories of ministers. The first one is, first category is the top level of ministers who are having important portfolios, right? So they are the top level of ministers, and that is the first level of minister. And second one is the ministers of state, and the third one is the deputy ministers, whose work is to assist the senior ministers, right? And when we talk about the function of the prime minister, um, and the link of the minister between the cabinet and the president, so the decisions of the cabinet, so cabinet here is that uh, it's a group of that important leaders. So the first category of ministers form this cabinet. They form this cabinet, and the meeting is to be held time to time in this cabinet whenever there is national emergency, whenever there is a matter related to public importance and public grievances. This meeting is held, and that meeting consists of top leaders of ministers, and that is known as cabinet meetings. And the ministers are known as cabinet ministers. So they are the top level of ministers, right? First category of minister. So whatever the decision is taken in that cabinet meetings, and that is conveyed by those decision are conveyed by the prime minister to the president. So president here, or prime minister, so here prime minister is the link between the cabinet and the president. So he is the intermediate, or intermediate between the cabinet, the top level of ministers, and the president, right? Now next is, it's written here, it is on the advice of the Prime Minister that the President summons and prorogues the Parliament and dissolves the Lok Sabha also. So it is on the advice of the Prime Minister only the President has the right, or the President can give decisions that for the summoning and the to prorogue the Parliament and to dissolve the Lok Sabha also, right? So to summons and to prorogue, to summon and to prorogue means to call and to dismiss the meetings of Lok Sabha. It may happen that the minister has taken a decision on some matter which has not been considered by the Council of Ministers. If so, the President may ask the Prime Minister to submit the matter for consideration of the Council. The President cannot remove a Prime Minister so long as he enjoys confidence and support of the majority in the Lok Sabha. So, unless until the Prime Minister is or Prime Minister fails, or the government fails, or unless until he receives the no confidence motion, the Prime Minister is or cannot be removed from his or her office. So the president is not supposed to remove the prime minister unless until the prime minister does not receive no confidence motion, and unless until he or she enjoys the majority, right, in the Lok Sabha. So the president cannot remove the prime minister as long as he or she enjoys the confidence in Lok Sabha. Now next function is prime minister and the cabinet. So in this you'll come to know about how prime minister acts in the cabinet. So I told you about the cabinet. Cabinet is what? It's a group of the top leaders, top ministers, right? Okay. So the function of prime minister or the working of Prime Minister in the cabinet. Okay. So the Prime Minister is the keystone of the cabinet. His role as a head of the Council of Ministers requires that he shall exercise the various powers, and those various powers are: number one, formation of the cabinet, and secondly, removal of the ministers. Third is the Prime Minister is the ex officio chairman of the Council of Ministers, and he also he directs and formulates the policies, foreign policies, and Prime Minister is the link between the cabinet and the president. So let's start. Let's talk about the formation of the cabinet. Okay, the formation of the cabinet, as we all know that the Prime Minister is the leader, head of the Council of Ministers or the cabinet, right? So he's the leader of the cabinet as well as he's the leader of Council of Ministers. So when we talk about the formation of the cabinet, the president appoints all the cabinet ministers, and the president allots the work among them, but on the consultation or on the advice of the Prime Minister only, right? So the president appoints, but on the advice of the Prime Minister. Next is removal of the ministers. So resignation of Prime Minister, that means it's a resignation of entire ministers, or the resignation of all the ministers, that is a Council of Ministers. But the Prime Minister's resignation means the resignation of the entire Council of Ministers. That means all ministers, they have to resign, right? No person shall be retained as a member of the Council of Ministers if the Prime Minister says that he should be dismissed. So this is the power of the Prime Minister, that he can dismiss any of the minister of his cabinet or the Council of Ministers. Now next is the Prime Minister is the ex officio chairman of the Council of Ministers. Prime Minister is the ex officio chairman of the Council of Ministers or the cabinet. So we know that Prime Minister is the head of the Council of Ministers or the head of the cabinet. So whatever the discussion or is done in the meetings, and at the cabinet, in that cabinet meetings, the ministers put forward their views, and the Prime Minister would listen to them, to his ministers, and then gives his own conclusion, right? Finally he gives his own conclusion, which normally is the decision of the cabinet. That is why the Prime Minister is the leader or the ex officio chairman of the Council of Ministers or the ex officio chairman of the cabinet. Right? Now next is the Prime Minister directs and coordinates the policies. The Prime Minister coordinates and working of various departments in foreign, defense, economic and technological affairs. He plays a vital role in coordinating the policy of the union, in the policy of the union, that means the central. So the Prime Minister directs, formulates and coordinates the policies and of the various working of various departments like defense, foreign affairs, economic and technological affairs. So he plays a very important role in shaping or coordinating the policy of the central government or the union. Now next is Prime Minister is a link between the cabinet and the president. Okay, in the cabinet meetings, matters like public importance, grievances and some national issues are discussed in the cabinet meetings, and finally the president gives his or her decision, right? So that conclusion or that decision is conveyed by the prime minister to the president. So the decisions of the cabinet are conveyed to the president through the prime minister. So this is the constitutional duties imposed on the prime minister to keep informing the president regarding the affairs of the union, affairs of the or the working of the or the decisions of the cabinet, right? Okay, now next. Okay, now the Prime Minister inside the Parliament. So, as you all know, that the President summons and prorogues the Parliament and dissolves the Lok Sabha, but on the advice of the Prime Minister only, right? So, it is on the advice of the Prime Minister that the President can summon and prorogue the Parliament and can dissolve the Lok Sabha. The Prime Minister is the principal spokesperson and defender of the government in the Parliament. So it is he who makes all important announcements of national policies as well as other policies, domestic as well as the national and international policies on the floor of the House. Sometimes ministers' work comes under severe attack in the House. It is the Prime Minister, right? Sometimes the working of the government is not accepted by the people, and sometimes the work comes under the severe attack in the House. So in that case, it is the Prime Minister, it's who he like it is the prime minister, the defender, who saves his ministers from an ugly and unpleasant situation in the house, right? So it is the prime minister only who can save or who can protect his ministers from that ugly situation. Now there are issues like wars, civil wars, or caste wars, corruption by people in position of authority. So rising of price, terrorist attacks. So if member of parliaments are angry or upset about something regarding these matters, so the matter generally ends with the intervention of the prime minister. So the prime minister has to make the prime minister has to give answer on that matters or on that issues, right? Now Nexus prime ministers represents India at the international conferences. So we know that prime minister, he is the leader of the nation, so he represents India at the world conferences, international conferences. Like India is the or one of the prominent members of BRICS and your SARC nations. So the leaders meet to discuss matters such as your economic trade, economy, the world economy, and the state-sponsored terrorism and world peace, etc. So these matters are discussed in those meetings of SARC and BRICS. So at such conferences, India is represented by the Prime Minister. Prime Minister is considered as a leader of the nation. So every person or everyone looks upon or looks to the Prime Minister for views on every subject. So it expects leadership from him, right? So Prime Minister as a leader of nation, he represents the nation to the world conferences also, and his country's people look for him for his for views on every aspects and every subjects, right? Okay, the position of the prime minister. So, position in India, the prime minister has got a very prominent and very important position, right? Because he is the real executive head of a state. So, the prime minister exercises vast authority both in legislation, lawmaking, and finance also, right? So besides, he may inspire a lot of people by his own qualities, personal qualities, right? So this is no wonder that many writers have started referring to the parliamentary form of government as a prime ministerial government, right? Okay, now this we have done about the position of the prime minister. Now the next topic is limitations on prime minister's position and authority. So what are the limitations are there? Now, limitations in this, we know that Prime Minister, whenever we talk about the Council of Ministers, so Council of Ministers consists of your cabinet ministers, top ministers, then ministers of state, and the deputy ministers. So, altogether, we call it Council of Ministers. So, being a leader of that cabinet and the council of ministers, the prime minister has to secure the willing cooperation of all important person of his party, because there are many there are different persons with the different views and different point of views they may have, right? So this is a difficult job for the prime minister to manage or to secure the willing of cooperation of all important persons of his party, so that he has to manage it, right? Secondly, there are opposition parties also, right, that never miss an occasion to grill the government. So whenever the ruling government miss out something, or whenever the ruling government fails to do something, in that case, in that situation, the opposition party never miss out that occasions to grill the government, right? So especially the prime minister, because the prime minister has to answer. Now, the third limitation is when there is no clear-cut majority, or no single party, political party has a majority, two or more parties come together to form a government, and that is known as coalition government. So when no single party gets clear-cut majority, in that situation, to get a majority, two or three groups or parties come together to form a government, and that type of government is known as coalition government. So it is actually, though they form a government, um, but it is a weak government, right? Because it reflects different viewpoints. The prime minister is always eager to please to please leaders of various parties, right? And if he fails to satisfy, or if he or she uh, fails to please the various leaders of parties, or the leaders of various parties, then the government may fall, or the government seem to be in a serious trouble, or sometimes the government may fall. Clear? Okay. So this is the limitation of coalition government, coalition party. Okay, not only that, the journalist newspapers or the news press correspondence, and your media, and the public opinion and public views um, on the prime ministers and the ruling governments working, so that they